Thank you very much. Well, somebody who certainly wasn't a one-hit wonder was the great Bob Dylan. And here are the words of one of his songs. I won't try and sing the song, but I'll read it to you. You may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble. You might like to dance. You may be the heavyweight champion of the world. You may be a socialite with a long string of pearls. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed. You're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord. But you're going to have to serve somebody. You might be a rock and roll addict prancing on the stage. You might have drugs at your command, women in a cage. You might be a businessman or some high-degree thief. They may call you doctor or they may call you chief. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed. You're going to have to serve somebody. It might be the devil, it might be the Lord. But you're going to have to serve somebody. And a profound song, I think it's true. That true autonomy, serving no one, being just an island, doesn't really exist in this world. All of us end up following somebody, trusting somebody, serving somebody. And the question is, who are you going to choose to trust? If you get to choose to follow, who are you going to choose to follow? And the part of Jesus' teaching we're going to look at is a warning that he has for us about how we make that decision. We asked the question on the Vox Pop, who would you trust your life with? And most people said mum or dad, which is very touching, and I guess I'd probably say the same. But who are you going to trust with your life when mum and dad have gone? When you're mum and dad, when that kind of decision of adulthood is on your shoulders, and now you have to decide your direction. Guess we live in a culture partly, don't we, which says I'll trust myself as much as I can. Autonomy is my best bet. I'll try and have no leaders at all. But actually, few of us will succeed in that. Few people in the world manage that. We live in nations with governments. And sometimes what those governments decide makes a massive difference to our lives. And we're born in, we live at least in England at a time of relative peace. But if you had been born in Germany in the 1920s, or you had been born in China in the 1950s, then during your life, massive things would have changed depending on who was in leadership. Many of you will graduate, you'll get a job, someone will be your boss, and the quality of your life may absolutely depend on your relationship with your boss and how they treat you. I can certainly remember two very, very grim times of my life working for people that I found very difficult to relate to. One of them was at the co-op when I was aged 14, and my mother told me I had to go and get a job finally. Was I 14? Well, I don't know if that's even legal. I was whatever age you can get a job legally, just about. And the manager of the co-op was also the dad of my school friend who also worked in the co-op. So he was always favoured in all the allocation of tasks in the supermarket. For example, he had to stack toilet rolls. If you've ever done shelf stacking, toilet rolls are the best thing to stack. They're massive, kind of 9 packs or 24 packs. So just a few packs, you filled an entire aisle, and they weigh nothing. Instead, every week I got the dog food. So I hated that job, and I didn't get on with the leader. And then there was another one that was more difficult later. But that will change your life. What the political powers are of your country, who the bosses of your company. But maybe even more than that, who you choose as your role models. Who you pick as the people to identify as your heroes, even if it's yourself. I think that's slightly sad if you say, I'll just admire myself and follow myself, that you won't get anywhere very quickly that way. Even if it's yourself, is that the right place to put your trust? Well, Jesus has a warning for us about who we choose to follow. Because as Bob Dylan said, you've got to follow, you've got to serve somebody. Actually, his warning comes not in the chapter we had read, but in the chapter after it. And what I'm hoping to do for these evening talks is just to open the pages of this book, this biography of Jesus, and to walk you through some of what he says. So it won't be any kind of special secrets for me that you don't know. It's just going to be things in this book that I'm going to show you. And then when you go home afterwards, and if you've still got this book, they'll still be there on the page. So you can forget what I've said, and hopefully I'll have just opened up what Jesus has said. But we're going to look at chapter 10 on page 29. And maybe everyone here could turn to that. That would be a real help to me, I think, and to you as well. And Jesus gives an analogy where we are sheep. Human beings are sheep. Maybe you don't think that's very flattering, but it's a common biblical picture for human beings who are often following other people and getting into trouble. And this is what Jesus says at the bottom of page 29, verse 7. Jesus said again, "I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He'll come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep, so when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd." And you see, throughout this passage, Jesus is contrasting himself as a leader, as one to follow, with various alternatives. He says, I am the gate. I'm the way in to God's perfect world, God's perfect pasture. If you go in through me, then you'll be saved and you'll be secure. And he says, I'm the shepherd. I'm the one to get you through that gate into God's pasture. If you follow me, then all will be well and you'll find good pasture. But I'm not the only leader going. If you're a sheep going around, wondering who to follow, you could follow the shepherd. In fact, you'd be wise to do that if you're an intelligent sheep. But I'm not the only option. Because also in this particular sheep pen, we have the thief and the robber. It'd be a mistake to follow a thief and a robber if you're a sheep, because you'll end up as a roast dinner by Sunday. And the other person is just the hired hand. So the person who's brought in as a temp, just because there's quite a lot of work to do on the farm. And in some ways, he'd be a mistake as well, because although he's employed to look after you, well, he's only a job's worth. It's only kind of worth his money, so long as the job's easy. And as soon as it gets difficult, he'll abandon you. And Jesus is saying, in effect, through this little story in which you're sheep, and he's a shepherd or a gate, and there's wolves, and there's robbers, and there's hired hands. He's saying, be careful whom you choose to follow with your life. It makes a difference whom you follow. Now, I don't think anyone would mind if I said tonight, or if Jesus had said back in the first century, I am one of the shepherds that you could choose to follow that would bring you some help in your life. That would be okay. I'm one of the shepherds. It might be that you want to follow the shepherd Muhammad, in which case, good luck to you, well done. He might be able to help you out. Or you might want to follow the shepherd Buddha, that's okay. Or you might want to follow the teachings of someone like Richard Dawkins and his philosophy as an atheist. That's okay. And I've got something to offer as well. So if you're into the kind of particular Christian brand of spirituality and you choose that as your life direction, then let me tell you, I can lead you into some pretty nice grazing pasture as well. That would be okay. That would be relatively inoffensive. But Jesus doesn't say that. He sets himself up as the good shepherd, and then he's kind of frighteningly universal about what he says in verse 8. Just look down again. Verse 7, I am the gate for the sheep. Verse 8, all who ever came before me were thieves and robbers. That's quite extreme, isn't it? Not I'm one of the shepherds, but I am the only good shepherd. And beware of following anyone else. Doesn't mean you shouldn't trust your mum, as we watched in the video. I was watching that video thinking, oh, goodness me, they're going to hate me because I've set up this question of whom should you follow and the good and the bad, and everyone's but their mum. And I'm going to have to say, don't follow your mum. There's nothing wrong with loving your mum, but even your mum, if you put your ultimate future and security in her hands, will let you down. Probably she'll die before you do. And in that way, you'll be on your own. But Jesus says ultimately everyone else is going to let you down in one of two ways. Either by being a thief and a robber, or by being a hired hand. The thief and the robber is actually out to get you. They're pretty hostile to you. The hired hand's on your side, but only to a point. And they'll let you down. Jesus says, I won't let you down. Well, you might be thinking, okay, well, that sounds very nice, and that's a great speech for Jesus to give as a kind of political rallying call. Come and follow me. It's just words, though. It's just claims. But actually, it isn't just claims, because what Jesus is saying here about shepherds and sheep in chapter 10 is his commentary on what has just happened in chapter 9. So we've actually got eyewitness evidence of exactly the kind of leadership that Jesus is talking about. And he says, I want you to understand now that there are two kinds of leaders. There are leaders who are thieves and robbers, and there is the good shepherd, there is me. So what I want to do in the time we've got left is contrast the two. First, I'm going to look at the thieves and the robbers, and then I'm going to look at the good shepherd. And actually, this is a picture that for Jewish readers of Jesus, for people first hearing him from a Jewish background, they're at an advantage because immediately they would pick up that Jesus is using language from the prophet Ezekiel, writing hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus in the Jewish scriptures. The prophet Ezekiel had warned against the shepherds of Israel, which was his way of talking about the leadership, the kings, the rulers, even the religious leaders, the priests of that country. And this is what he says: prophesy against the shepherds, our shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding yourselves. You eat the fat, you clothe yourself with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you don't feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them. In other words, these false shepherds have been self-serving, and they haven't cared for the sheep. Well, you might think there's echoes of that even in modern politics, as we had the big scandal about the expenses row. Or you might think it's a scandal about the kind of US intelligence system, as we had all the scandal about the information that they're analysing and collecting about you. Or a scandal about the police force, as all the controversy about the police shootings in London. Almost all the leaders of our country have let us down in one way or another. But actually, Jesus is talking even more profoundly than that. He's not just talking about the leaders of the United Kingdom. He's talking about the spiritual leaders who set themselves up as experts of the way to paradise. He says, watch out for them. They're self-serving. They won't look after you. And that is his commentary, actually, on what we've just seen. Turn back to chapter 9, which we had read, so page 26. Here is one of the signs that John records in his biography that convinced him that this guy Jesus he'd met wasn't just an ordinary bloke, but can only have been his God and creator of the universe. We saw that in the first talk on Monday night. This bloke, John, is a fisherman. He is convinced that the man he met, called Jesus, was actually God. And he shares with us in his biography the very things that Jesus did that persuaded him that must be the case. And here's one of them. Here's one of Jesus' incredible miracles. Chapter 9, a man born blind. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. Just an aside, sometimes people think, don't they, that God is out to get the people who are suffering the most. So that if we kind of lined everyone in this church up, I asked you to do this yesterday as well, we lined everyone up this time on a scale of having the worst time at that side to having the easiest life at that side. Jesus says that would not correlate necessarily to the people who've lived a good life and people who've led a wretched life. It's just not the case that if you're suffering, that you've been worse. The disciples assume that. Jesus says, no, that's not how it's working in this case. God wasn't out to get this man. He was just blind because God was about to demonstrate something incredible in his life. Jesus spits, makes some mud, puts it on his eyes, and he can see. But I don't want you to look at the miracle for now. We'll focus on that in a minute. I want you to notice the reaction to the miracle of the religious leaders of the day. So these are the people that people would look to give guidance, to tell me the answer to my spiritual journey. The equivalent might be the archbishops of today, or your vicar, or your rabbi, or your favourite philosopher. The person you turn to give you guidance. And here they are, they're the experts. And what they decide to do is to check. They don't believe it just because of say-so. They want to see if it really actually happened. And this is a great relief to me, because if all we had in the Bible was just the ideas of miracles that only Christians believed because they wanted to, well, I might think, what if they exaggerated a bit and that kind of thing. But here we've got an account of a miracle that even Jesus' opponents can investigate and check out. And, well, you'll see what happens. Just notice how they behave. Verse 13, they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now, the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath, a Saturday, which in Jewish law was the day that you were supposed to rest from your work. And there's actually a history of the Pharisees getting annoyed with Jesus for working on Saturday, or at least what they think of as working on Saturday. He doesn't really do much work. He just makes some mud and then puts it on someone's eyes, and that's all that's required. It's not like he kind of does a day's work as an eye surgeon. But they get upset anyway, and they say, oh, no, you can't do this on a Saturday. But notice how interesting it is. They don't deny that he did it. Their initial problem is that he didn't do it the way that they thought he should have done it. They didn't do it. He did it on the wrong day of the week. This can't be right. This doesn't fit our expectations. What happened? Therefore, verse 15, the Pharisees asked him how he'd received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied. I washed and now I see. It's very straightforward, you see. This is my testimony. I was blind. He put mud. Now I see. But the Pharisee says, this man is not from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? So they're confused. We don't like Jesus, but he seems to have done this. We can't work it out. So they asked the man, what do you have to say about him? He's a prophet. Well, he can't be a prophet. He doesn't do the things that we want him to do. So, okay, enough of him. Let's get the guy's parents in. Let's check it out. Maybe he's just faking the fact that he was blind and now can see. So they get the parents in over the page. And they say, is this the one that you say was blind? So kind of slightly offensive, leading the witness kind of questioning. You say he was blind. Well, he was blind. They say he's our son. We grew up with him for years and years. He couldn't see anything. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. They say because they're intimidated by the questioning. So the second time they summoned the man who'd been blind, verse 24. And this time, instead of asking him a question, they tell him the answer before they ask the question. So they say, look, we know that Jesus is a sinner. He's not from God. So anyway, give glory to God. He's a sinner. The guy says, I don't know if he's a sinner or not. I do know that he opened my eyes. They said, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He says, I've told you already. You didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. And then verse 34, to this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us and throw him out? Here is an example of the religious establishment of the day in the way that they deal with a poor man who was blind. He's just been granted sight. What's going on? Well, they're certainly not looking after him. They treat him absolutely shamefully. They treat his parents shamefully. But why is that? What is their problem? Jesus explains at the very end of chapter 9. Verse 39, for judgment I've come into this world so that the blind will see and those who see will become blind. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and said, are we blind as well? Jesus said, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty of sin, but now you claim you can see, your guilt remains. What is happening in this chapter is that the Pharisees make up their mind about Jesus irrespective of the evidence that they see. Actually, the more and more they investigate, the more and more clear it is that a miracle's happened. Here's a guy who seems to have been blind. The parents say, yeah, he was blind. The guy says, yeah, he was blind, and now he can see. But they've decided already that that can't be the case. And so actually, as the chapter goes on, they become more and more entrenched in their position. In fact, actually, the more evidence they get for Jesus having done a miracle, the more absolutely confident they are that Jesus is their enemy and not from God. Now, this is a very dangerous path to be on because, of course, what can you do to fix it? The more evidence they get, the more opposed they are. You think, well, maybe we could solve it by looking at more evidence. If only God would give me more evidence. No, because that's not the problem. Their problem is that they will not come into the light. Jesus says. You remember last night I talked about the spiritual cockroach going down the stairs in a boarding school, turning on the light. The cockroaches scuttle for the darkness. They hide from the darkness. And Jesus said we're a bit like that by nature. We're hiding from the truth about God. And these leaders exemplify that. They will not come into the light. They refuse to follow the evidence. Why? Because they've already decided that Jesus doesn't fit their categories. Now I say that because it always frightens me in a week like this, just how easy that route is. Meet people and they begin to look at the evidence of Jesus, and then they have objections, and it turns out the objections aren't really related to the evidence itself. It's just kind of any excuse that I can put in the way because I've already decided I don't want to believe. Well, these leaders, they won't come into the light themselves. And as a result, they persecute those who do. Here are leaders who've decided to reject God, to go their own way, and they persecute those who do. Jesus says, watch out for the thief and the robber. Watch out for the shepherds who only serve themselves. Now, that could be a warning against politicians or corrupt policemen or dodgy doctors. But actually, it's a warning particularly against religious or philosophical teachers. Come this way, they say. Here's the answer to life. There's probably no God, they say, so get on and enjoy life. Follow us in this fivefold path of Islam, they say, and perhaps get to paradise. And Jesus says, watch out. These are the leaders that will not listen to the evidence of the light. They will not pay attention to my miracles. They won't listen to my words. They've decided to reject it, and they will persecute you if you follow it. I have to say that the really scary thing is that the false shepherds Jesus spoke about weren't even from other religions or from atheism. Actually, he was worried about false leaders within his own religion, within the religion of Judaism. And I have to say to you, even today, some of the people that you most need to be aware of are people in churches. I remember growing up, going along to my local village church and once asking my vicar at about age 16 what to do with my guilty conscience and how I could go into heaven. And I won't tell you what he said, but the answer wasn't the same as Jesus' answer. It was, I can tell you what he said. He said, don't sleep around too much, be a good bloke and you'll get in. And that is not what Jesus says. Beware of the false shepherds who serve themselves. There's a poem I love that just warns us against religious people and religious establishments. It's called How to Hide Jesus. It goes like this. There are people after Jesus. Quick, let's hide him. Let's think. His tongue was of the masses. We'll teach him Latin and 17th century English. They'll never think of listening in. Let's think. Friend of the poor and nowhere to lay his head. We'll build a house for him somewhere away from the poor. We'll fill it with brass and silence. That's sure to throw them off. There are people after Jesus. Quick, let's hide him. I love that poem. Just a warning that actually the religious establishment can be the most hostile to you encountering Jesus himself. I certainly found that when I started looking into it at university. Jesus says, beware the thief and the robber. And you will discover that in Durham if you begin to seek after Jesus. Go back from tonight, you tell your friends in college, I went to that Christian Union talk. It was about Jesus. It was really interesting. Maybe you don't think that, but supposing you did, it was really interesting. Jesus sounded like an amazing leader. And you'll notice that some people aren't really willing to look into that themselves, and so they'll begin to be hostile to you, even just because of your looking into it. The peer pressure, no, don't go that way. Come with us. Come with the crowd this way. If you persist, rejection. Jesus says, beware of those who will let you down. They won't come into the light themselves, and they persecute those who do. Well then, secondly, more briefly, watch out for the hired hand. This person isn't trying to lead you in a kind of mischievous, self-serving way, but it's just there on a kind of hourly wage, and their job's not really worth it more than the easy life of looking after some sheep. When the wolf comes, the hired hand abandons the flock and runs away. It's just not committed enough. Finally, Jesus says, what about me? What about the true shepherd? Well, again, back in the prophet Ezekiel, he contrasted the shepherds. God had warned about those who are self-seeking. The weak you haven't strengthened, the sick you haven't healed, the injured you haven't bound up, the strayed you've not brought back, the lost you haven't sought. With force and harshness you've ruled with them. And then God says, I myself will be the shepherd. I'm fed up with leaders stuffing up the job of leading people. I'm going to do the job myself, says God. I will seek the lost. I will bring back the strayed. I will bind up the injured. I will strengthen the weak. The fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them in justice, says the Lord. Jesus picks up on that prophecy from many hundreds of years before and says, I am the good shepherd. Well, again, it's not just words because we can see it happening. Here's a man who's blind, and the Pharisees kick him out as being a sinner. You're a nobody. You're steeped in sin at birth. Get out. But Jesus treats him very graciously, very well, opens his eyes. And notice Jesus opens his eyes not only physically in this chapter. That's a miracle. There really is some kind of optic nerve transformation, some visual cortex realignment. There's all kinds of amazing things happening physiologically here. But Jesus heals him not only physically, but also spiritually. And right at the beginning of the chapter, his eyes are open physically. He can suddenly see things. But then as the chapter goes on, he begins to perceive things spiritually. Begins to see things clearly in terms of who Jesus is. What is it that gets this man from ignorance about Jesus to clear sight about Jesus? Well, one of the things that gets him from one to the other is actually the Pharisees. Because they ask him all their hostile questions, and it makes him just kind of reflect on the evidence. What actually happened? Well, I was blind, and then this guy touched me, and I could see. They say he's a sinner. It doesn't seem that he could be a sinner because God gave him pretty amazing power. Seems he must be from God. And as you go through the chapter, his verdict about Jesus progresses. At the beginning, he says, the man they call Jesus did this. I don't really know who he is. Then he says, well, I can't see how he can be a sinner because he did this. And then finally, he meets Jesus and he says, Lord, I believe. And he worships him. He reflects, in other words, on the evidence. As he looks at the evidence of what's actually happened, it leads him to the conclusion, Jesus must be my God. No one else could heal the blind with a touch. He must be God. But Jesus not only opens his eyes physically, Jesus opens his eyes spiritually. Verse 39, for judgment I've come into this world so that the blind will see. Those who think they can see become blind. The Pharisees confirmed in their entrenched position, we will not consider the evidence. We've already made up our minds. But Jesus graciously with this man, helping him to understand, this is who I am. This is what I've done for you. I am your Lord. And so he sees spiritually. He perceives. Not in spite of the evidence as a kind of leap in the dark, but because of the evidence, because his eyes are open to see what actually happened. And he believes. Which shepherd comes out best out of chapter 9? Well, clearly Jesus does. The religious establishment come out pretty badly. And then in chapter 10, Jesus adds one other glorious reason to trust him rather than anyone else. I'm the good shepherd. The thieves and robbers come to serve themselves, to devour you, to fill their own stomachs. Watch out for them. The hired hand is all very good on a pleasant day where the sun's out, but if the wolf comes, he'll run away because he's only a hired hand. He won't go into danger for you. But page 30, if you just turn to it as we close, page 30, where it says, verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. Verse 17, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. Jesus is referring to his death on the cross and his resurrection from the grave. That's the subject of our next 2 talks. Tomorrow night, Jesus' death. Friday night, his resurrection. He says, that is the proof that I am the leader that will not let you down. Why? Well, firstly, Jesus is about the truth, not hiding from the truth. He's about the light, not scuttling away from the light. Beware of the leaders who are always trying to bury the evidence about God so they can go their own way. Jesus will tell you the truth about God so you can find him. He's different in that respect. But he's also different in this respect, that he doesn't serve himself. He doesn't serve you only so far and then he stops if it gets dicey, like the hired hand. Jesus will serve you right the way through to his death for you. He loves you so much that if you got into danger with a wolf, he would give his life to save you from danger. And that's what we looked at last night. That Jesus says that God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only son, Jesus, to die on a cross, that whoever believes in him wouldn't have to die themselves under God's judgment, but could have eternal life. Here's the test of a leader. Which one of them would give their life to save you from God's judgment? Well, you go through the world leaders, can't you, and test them by that criterion. They taught some things. They tried to get a following for themselves. In many cases, in most cases, they end up pretty nicely off for their religious teaching. And in no case did they offer themselves in a loving sacrifice for you. The price is too high, either because they were bad, just after feathering their own nest, or because they're a hired hand and their leadership only goes so far. But Jesus says, this is how much you can trust me. I'll tell you the truth. I'll open your eyes, if you'll listen to what I say, to see what's true. And when you get into danger, I'll lay down my life for you. And actually, all of us are in danger. All of us have wandered off as sheep into trouble, wandered away from God, wandered into the darkness, and deserve God's judgment for that. But Jesus came to give up his life on the cross as our substitute, to receive himself the punishment that our wrongdoing deserved, so that if we trust in him, we might have eternal life. And Jesus says he's not one of the shepherds who will do that, but the only one. I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. Well, we're halfway through our week of events. It might be you're here for the first time tonight, in which case, welcome. Hope you'll be able to join us again tomorrow and Friday as we look at Jesus' death and resurrection. It might be this is just the very beginning for you of investigating the evidence for Jesus, the things that John actually saw that convinced him that this guy was actually God. If that's you, please do take the evidence away and read it. In fact, why not read it tomorrow and come back to the evening talk tomorrow, having gone through it once yourself, and have some questions afterwards. But it might be that there's someone here who's actually been following this for a while. Maybe you've been speaking to Christians a little bit. You've looked at some of the Bible for yourself. You've been to several of the talks this week. And for you, things are starting to slot into place. Maybe your eyes are beginning to be opened as you've looked at the evidence, as Jesus has helped you. And you want to know how it is that you would begin to follow this shepherd, how you could trust your future to him, how you could trust your life into his hands. And if that is someone today, I would love to talk to you at the end, just to share with you briefly how it is that you might make a start in following Jesus. But I hope everyone who's here is not going to do what the Pharisees do, make up their minds and become more and more entrenched in their refusal to look at the evidence. Please don't do that this evening. Please come back, please hear more, please read more, and do come and chat with me at the end if you'd like to. Thank you.